Okay, it's 2 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I'm sure there'll be a few more that will join us in the next few minutes. Please welcome Jason, Ann, and Natalie from our Student Access Center, and they're going to teach us a bit more about accessibility in the online areas. So take it away.
Thank you, Laura. It's good to see you all today. And yeah, we're going to talk about accessibility. And excuse me, I'm going to say next slide periodically. Ann is controlling our slides remotely. And so go ahead and hit the next slide, Ann. And I welcome you all. This is Jason Maisberg-Tomlinson. I'm the director of the Student Access Center. And we work with students with disabilities here at Kansas State University, and primarily working with academic accommodations. As though many of you know, we also work with some housing accommodations and assistance for students across campus, really trying to make sure our entire campus is accessible for students and our programs are accessible. And with me is Ann Pierce, who's my assistant director and of the Student Access Center. She works a lot with text accessibility and with students who are blind, visually impaired, and also oversees our testing center on campus, and many of you might know her through that. Natalie Bahari is also with us, and she's our deaf and hard of hearing advisor, and she's been working with the Student Access Center for a number of years and works a lot with students who are deaf and hard of hearing. And you see her you see her do American Sign Language, ASL, at many events on campus. And Natalie works a lot with captioning. That's my faux pas earlier. Working with text on video, so we have captions for students with who are deaf and hard of hearing. Go ahead and hit the next slide, Ann. I'm going to give you an overview and then let them talk more in depth about some of their areas, because they do focus a lot more on the areas that can be more challenging for online learning, or can be, I wouldn't say not always. And this kind of fits and situates in with your work this week about accessibility for students with disabilities, and it's within the framework of universal design. I say that because I picture universal design as kind of a bigger picture in the Venn diagram, a bigger circle, and accessibility is a smaller, although still a large part of universal design as a component to that. And with accessibility, we're talking about making sure that all of our information is accessible to all users. Now, one thing to keep in mind is our guidance is specific to students registered with a disability using reasonable accommodations. That's primarily our student body that we work with. But keep in mind, a lot of this helps build towards universal design in all courses, and some of the components of what we do can be used in courses to make them beneficial to all students. And we'll talk about that today. We're also talking about, when we work on accommodations and some of the accommodations we're going to talk specifically about today, it's with those students who have registered with our office. Important to note, not all students register with our office. And I bring that up because with COVID-19, we have students who are reaching out to us who didn't need accommodations in the on-campus environment. A student today reached out. She's worked with our office in the past, not with academic accommodations, but in regards to ADHD, and said, I've noticed a change with online learning. My disability is impairing me more in the online learning environment than it did in the classroom. So things are changing for our students, and we look at the environment. We work with our students in an interactive process of looking at the student, getting their history, their learned experiences, and what they've been through, the environment. We interact with a lot of you to understand what accommodations are appropriate in the classroom. That all shifts, as you all know, with remote learning. We're going to focus today specifically on that on-campus students or that content moved into remote environments. So a little bit more about that today. But this goes towards building an online classroom as well. In general, good techniques. We're going to go over some awarenesses of students using accommodations, some pieces that not everybody's familiar with. We're going to talk specifically about exam accommodations, text files, and video and audio content, and as it pertains to our remote learning environment that we're going to be in for this summer. Again, it's for all online learning though. As I said, please pardon our cues to one another as we advance the slides. Usually we're in the same room together, and this promotes is a little bit different environment for us. And we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for questions, but if you have questions throughout, we're here to chat. please consider this kind of a casual environment. I will admit I'm sitting here fidgeting my hands because I'm used to getting up, walking around the room, and being more interactive, and it's a little bit different. Go ahead and hit the next slide in. So, in thinking about accommodations in remote learning, our biggest, where we start is be understanding. And the provost has said that, other administrators have said that. Let's be understanding, let's be flexible, and listening to student needs as we've moved into remote learning and as we continue to do so for the near future. And it goes with any learning environment, to be honest. Listen to the student, and also know that if you have questions, please come chat with us. There are 4 of us who work with Access as Access advisors with students, the 3 of us and Lindsay Kubina. And we're happy to chat with faculty to make sure that accommodations are working in the classroom, that everything's working appropriately, but also to be there for you all. I always say our office fits a unique situation. We're here for the students, but we're also here for our faculty. When we look at the interactive process with accommodations, it's for both groups. Do understand that some students are using other technology other than Canvas or Zoom when they're in their learning environment that you may not have seen in the classroom. For example, students may be using text-to-speech technology to read information to them. It could be on an exam. They're using Read and Write, which we have as a university, takes a text, reads it aloud through the computer so they can hear it, and changes the content type, not the content itself, but the type so they can learn it through another method. And that's going to be important to them. They're not trying to cheat. They're just simply listening to the information because maybe the person has a learning disability, a dyslexia, whatnot. They're also using that on message boards and maybe even in Zoom. If you have students reading something and participating that way back and forth as a group, they may be bringing up that technology to play back to them. Another piece that comes up, it's come up in the last couple of weeks, more and more, and I've worked with online education in the past as well. It can be difficult for students to track information from screen to paper and back again during class and during exams, and so please be understanding of that. I say that because that tracking of information, you know, you're going down to paper, okay, now I'm going up to the screen, and for someone like me, it's even difficult because I wear bifocals and I've got to look at a different part of my glasses and go back and forth, and it's not easy for our eyes to adjust. For somebody whose disability may affect their executive functioning, that could be more of a challenge because you're holding that information in your head as you're going from one piece to the other. I also bring up that many students have had some of these skills for 12 years, or longer or shorter, depending on the student, on how they work in the learning environment. Some of their self-accommodating processes have been around the classroom environment, and that doesn't transition as well to remote learning. And so they're struggling through that. Some of the students we work with choose to do on-campus classes for a reason. It's fitting to their learning style, their accommodation needs, and they're more comfortable. And so that all has been disrupted, as in everything else. Another thing that I know we brought up time and time again, but I have to echo it, is no one has the same internet speed that we're used to on campus. I think about our testing accommodations and that read and write software. You know, some of those things are utilizing some of the internet activity to foster that program to work, and they're no longer having the same connection, and that's different. And nobody, I don't know if any of us have the same internet speed as we did on campus. I know I don't. So that's affecting all the technologies in use. Not to mention, in our testing center, we're going to have some of that technology, but they're not, and faster computer, but the student's computer, their laptop, whatever they're working out from home, may be slower. Zoom is popular, and obviously a lot of us have used it a lot, and it's become our daily routine. Students are not used to being seen by everyone. Our students, giving an example, perhaps somebody with anxiety. When I'm here on Zoom, I may be a small picture on my screen, but I feel like people are looking at me. Not just because I'm speaking, but you know, I'm kind of there, I'm in front. In a classroom, I sit in the class, the back of the classroom, I'm not as visible. But in Zoom, it's a little bit more. So don't be surprised if a student turns off their video. That may make them feel more comfortable in that environment. It can also be visually and auditorially distracting to those students. So let's say, go back to the student with ADHD. Classroom worked really well, but now they have Zoom up, they're participating in lecture, and they have a lot of movement, different videos. but also different sounds coming through. That's harder to filter out. And not to mention, how many times have we been in a classroom teaching, we realize our students are on Facebook. They're at a computer now, and those things come up constantly. And there's a lot of distractions. So be aware of that. But Zoom, you may see eyes wander, you may see things come up, but figure out how we can work with Zoom, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, to minimize those distractions for your students. If possible, do recordings so that students have notes or access to information after class. Some of our students had note-taker accommodation, where another student was taking notes for them during class because they couldn't keep up with notes, couldn't jot down. So that recording is that copy of their notes, essentially, to go back and listen to, which can be wonderful, actually, for a lot of our students, because they may be auditorial learners. And instead of reading a piece of paper notes from somebody, they're listening to it again, and they're absorbing that information much better than they had to, maybe even in the classroom. If you're sending information, and this has come up with exams, I'll talk a little bit more about this, via email, keep some items in mind. Considering how difficult it may be to organize that information for students whose disability affects their executive functioning. We go to class, we're told what to do, we write that down, becomes kind of daily habit. We organize that information, we're told how to organize that information. When we're emailing, and we have email, Canvas, Zoom, different components to a class, make sure it's all succinct and that the same information is shared similarly across all those platforms, so that somebody doesn't hear it one way here, another way here, and think, ooh, is that the same information? I'm not quite sure. But be clear and concise, and let people know what they need to do. Use bullet points if possible. And remember, a lot of students aren't aware of Canvas, and so make sure you're specific. We're going to do this quiz, we're going to go straight to this, and we're going to do it here. Here's how you navigate to the quiz in Zoom. Here are the steps we take. Bullet lists are wonderful. And you know, you can even do them in ordinal list. So it's 1, 2, 3, so we know what action steps to take. Laura posted a chat, executive functioning. Executive functioning, it's a whole area. But largely it's that our ability to take 2 items of information, good example of like test taking, and synthesize that information in our heads and then write it onto paper. Math might be a good example. Some of us can look at math problems, see 2 sides of an equation. We can figure those out in our head, write it down, we're done. Other people need to see that information visually, step by step, because their ability to process that information in the brain is affected one way or another. It's also a matter of how we organize information. As people have said a lot, it's like an executive assistant. They help us organize and frame the information so we can understand it into our mental filing system, so it's easy to access and then apply to new information as we're going through. So I think of it a lot as making sure we do everything step by step, help students organize information, understand how information belongs together. Again, I go back to the student in the classroom. To listen to a lecture where somebody's pointing at information on a board, it's different from somebody just verbalizing it and not seeing those graphic images. Okay, next slide. I'm going to talk, we're going to talk in kind of 3 areas, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth for exams, because that affects a lot of our students with accommodations. And we've found a lot of questions from faculty have come up in regards to exams and working with exams, and some in regards to students with disabilities and some not. Okay, and Canvas, of course, that's a realm where many of us are used to with exams and kind of that traditional format. And I'm going to say exam versus assessment. When I say exams, I mean that traditional pen and paper, multiple choice, essay, assessment type. Remember to provide extra time to students with exam accommodations that specify the extended time. And you'll get that letter of accommodation from students. In the past, many faculty have had that student take their exam in our office, and we apply the extra time, make sure things happen. Well, now that we're in Canvas, it's no longer as easy. So we have to program Canvas to make sure it does the extra time. Works out really well. I do it in my own class from time to time, and it's a couple settings. You just change it so that person has an extended time. There's a link on our website. If you go to the ksu.edu/access center, and then /faculty, or there's a button for faculty, and there's information on extending time in Canvas. So here's a question for you all. If anybody wants to put into the chat, verbalize it, whatever your choice. When should you apply extended time if you're giving all students extended time? Let's say your test is usually an hour. You're going to give students online 2 hours. How much extended time do you give the student who needs time and a half? See if anybody responds. None. Oh, okay. So we have one person says none. 3 hours. They should still get time and a half. Excellent. So 3 hours is what should be done. The reason for that is that, okay, we're giving all students 2 hours. Yeah, we wrote it for an hour, but we're giving all the students 2 hours. Well, that student with accommodation also gets their time and a half. Reason for that, and question has come up a number of times, is that the other students, we wrote it for an hour. Those students are taking the full 2 hours. Many of them are taking the time to do it. They're accessing additional resources perhaps during that time. If it's an unproctored exam, maybe you've got open book, open note. Some students are taking that time. The student with the extended time still warrants the extra time to gather that information to complete the exam. So good job there. I think we've had the question come up, well, should I at all? Because I'm just allowing the time for the transfer of information over Canvas or email. But it still goes back to that. That's the accommodation, and legally we need to give that accommodation whenever we have those parameters. Another piece, I'm not going to throw this too much in there, but also think about that person with executive functioning. It's harder to go through your notes to find the information and put it on the screen. That back and forth is difficult. Okay, next slide. Zoom. Some exams are taking place over Zoom. And so I want to caution everyone to kind of think about that. It can be very distracting. If you look at your typical meeting in Zoom, watch how many people are looking at email in the background, doing other things. And it makes it very interesting to kind of focus that. And so just kind of keep in mind, give them permission at the beginning of a test, verbally in text, whichever, that they can minimize the video or explain how they can minimize Zoom so it's not always up there. Maybe you need to see their video so you're aware of any cheating that's going on. Understandable, but allow them to compact it down. Also allow students to turn their audio down. And if you have anything to say, consider using the chat function and make sure you tell students, watch the chat function. If there's something you're going to say in the middle of the exam, maybe you have something wrong, use the chat function, get that information to them, or minimize what you're going to say in the middle of an exam. To leave it up there for students to constantly listen to your audio, student B over here could have left their audio on, and it could make it more difficult for them to pay attention. It can be a lot of distractions. So give them permission to turn down the audio so they don't have to hear everybody else. So Judy asks, if the student gets time and a half, and now all the students assignments are multi-take with 3 attempts, should they get extra attempts? That's an interesting point. So if they're untimed, time and a half, untimed is challenging, and so I would want to talk a little bit more about that perhaps, but if the students get 3 attempts, they all get 3 attempts. It's a matter of the extra time per attempt, not the number of times to take it. That's an interesting point though. Now, open time, if it's unlimited time, let's say it's for the whole day, we want to chat. That could have other pieces intermixed into that, so we want to talk about the specific accommodation. Okay, so if you give the time of a week, but it's an hour long, then students with accommodation still have a week, but 1.5 hours. Yeah, that's a good. Canvas is interesting. It allows us to set a window. Students have to take the exam in this window, but when they open up the exam, they only have an hour of time. So the student with the extra time gets an hour and a half, but they get that hour and a half over the same parameters. It's that window that it's open. I like that question. That's good. They used to come up a lot when Laura and I used to work with a lot of online exams for Global Campus together years ago. And always feel free to holler and ask a question too. We can kind of talk through that. Okay, go ahead in the next slide. Email. We have some faculty who are emailing exams, and then that student is taking an hour to do the exam and emailing it back. And I think it allows for some wonderful flexibility. In fact, it might allow for many different ways to do an exam. So maybe it's essay and allows that student who uses a screen reader or dictation software or other pieces to get that all done. Then uh, it can be creative. And like I said, there are other ways of assessment. And we can, Dawn at the Learning Center has said, let's think about other ways of assessment. And I think it's awesome. But we also recognize that some students do need that structure. There's no proctor to tell students when they're done. In our test center, the student had the time and a half in the class, or let's say even in the classroom, they have time. The professor or one of us is telling them they're done with their time. So to say you're going to email it back in an hour, remember, recognize that they have nobody telling them that their time is up. They're keeping track of it themselves. And so that can be a little bit different. I also want to bring up students home may be more distracting than the classroom. Got a lot of students I've spoken with who have families and their children are in the area. They're taking care of them and trying to do the exam at the same time. There's a lot going on. And so I go back and echo alternative assessments allow students to use their strengths, demonstrate what they know, and we can think about it that way in different project based. I know the challenges with that though, and how difficult it is to change a class, especially in the middle of the semester like we did this term. So we understand that. But as always though, ask us questions. We're here to chat. And you can email our office at accesscenter@ksu.edu, and we'd be happy to talk more about exam accommodations. With that, I think that's my last slide. So I'm going to pass it over to Anne, and I'm going to shut my mic off. If there's any other questions towards the end, I'll be happy to answer them later.
Okay. All right. So, yes, I'm Ann Pierce, and I hope that you can hear me all right. My dog is my constant companion at home, and she has decided to take this opportunity to snore. So I hope that's not a problem for anybody, but I do want to point out that text made accessible is complex. And in the few minutes that I have, I am going to focus on the top 2 or 3 ways you can start to create accessible documents. When you have a student in your course that has the accommodation of alternative text, that is when accessible text becomes a requirement. In part, the accommodation reads, instructors are responsible for posting course materials in an accessible format, such as Microsoft Word, HTML, or accessible PDFs. Today, we're going to look at Word, PowerPoint, and PDFs. And we will go from easiest to hardest. And I do want to point out that I don't do this type of production work all the time. So when I do have to work on documents, I certainly forget how to do certain things. So I generally go to YouTube and type in what I am looking for and refresh my memory. And there are some very good resources and step-by-step instructions in the Canvas course. Okay, so now I am stuck. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Microsoft introduced the accessibility checker in 2010, and it is available in Word, Excel, Outlook, OneNote, and PowerPoint. The purpose of the checker is to list potential accessibility issues, explain why it might be an issue, and then most importantly, offer suggestions on how to fix the issue. You can click on the error or warning, and it will highlight the issue in the document. There are 3 classifications. Errors are the most obvious issues, followed by warnings and tips. In the almost 8 years that I have been at K-State, I have yet to have a student tell me they could not access a Word document. That doesn't mean we should ignore best practices. It means that Word is in itself accessible. We, as the creators, can certainly add things to make it inaccessible. For visual elements, add alternative text. Remember the importance of being concise in your description and the relevant content. For instance, if you have a complex chart or a complex table that has 20 columns, 15 rows of numbers, and you don't expect students to memorize all the numbers, what you want them to come away with is that, say, the unemployment rate has gone down for the last 10 years. That is what you need to type in the alternative text box. The thing that is relevant, the thing that you want a student to come away with. Headings and paragraph styles give your document structure. You can check this by turning on the navigation pane and it will show you your progress. Accessible links is important to screen reader users. If your document is only going to be digital, then you don't need the URL listed. If the document is meant to be printed, then you should make, for example, Kansas State University the hyperlink and type in the URL in parentheses, but it shouldn't be an active link. To create lists, use the tools that are available, the numbered list or the bulleted list. And then tables should be simple structure with no split cells or merged cells and specify header information. Just as an aside, we should not promote the use of Prezi. I don't know how popular Prezi is anymore. I do know that one college was using it for classroom use a while back. Prezi is another presentation program that is inaccessible, and the company has made no effort to make it compliant. PowerPoint, by its very nature, is visual. So anyone who has low vision or is blind needs to be able to interact with the content differently. I have had to work with a number of PowerPoint presentations because instructors did not follow the first guideline, which is use templates. There are several choices out there to satisfy our creative side. You can find some of those at templates.office.com. Again, use alternative text for visual elements. You can mark decorative visuals as decorative, and a screen reader will ignore it. Color should not be the only means of conveying information. For instance, if you have a red bus route and a blue bus route, and you show these on a map with the only distinction being the color, you will have people that can't utilize the map. Think of showing one bus route with the color blue and a straight line, and the other with the color red and a broken line. You are conveying the same information in two different ways. So I mentioned earlier that we would go from easiest to hardest. We are now at the hardest. There are several pieces of the puzzle that have to be put together for a PDF to be accessible. If you are the creator of the PDF, then more than likely you created the document in Word or some other program. If you create an accessible Word document and save the document as a searchable PDF, then the structure stays with the document, and that is a good thing. However, if you are scanning articles in and saving those as PDFs, then it is more than likely the PDF is an image. A screen reader and text-to-speech can't interact with an image, so you simply hear the word image, and that is not helpful to the student. The necessary elements are the same. You need structure, a logical reading order, appropriate headings, etc. It is just harder to do. Adobe Pro has a checker function, and it will list errors and warnings, and you can click on the errors, and the program again will make suggestions on how to fix the issue. If you don't have Adobe Pro, K-State has a site license for Read and Write, which is equipped with Abby Fine Reader, and that is an optical character recognition program. And not to get too deep into the weeds, but optical character recognition takes an image of text and converts it to machine encoded text so that assistive technology can interact with the text. When you have a student with the accommodation of alternative text, remember to request searchable PDF files from the library, and they will be happy to help you. If you have a student and you have 20 articles that you've posted to Canvas and they have reported to you that they are inaccessible, please let our office know. I do some production work, and if it is more than the office can handle, we will certainly send that out to a third-party vendor. I think the chat has been active, but I haven't been paying attention.
Dan, I've been looking up a couple things, so I'll jump in here if you don't mind.
Not at all.
So I looked up, a couple folks asked about Sway and Haiku Deck for presentations. Sway is interesting. It's run by Microsoft Office, actually. It's a product of them. And they do have accessibility features, and they have a site that talks about using it in an accessible fashion. I think it's linked. Underneath the code is HTML and some of the same styles that run PowerPoint and Word and other things as well. So it can be quite accessible. Following the same comments that Anne made in regards to using the template and using text and so on. Haiku Deck, I find challenging. From what I understand it can be made accessible, but I can't find anything on it from their website. I didn't see any links. I've looked at it in the past, and when you search for accessibility in Haiku Deck, it brings you up Haiku Deck presentations on accessibility. And so I haven't been able to find some good information there. So I can't answer that completely, but Sway should be good. And there have been a couple comments in regards to active links, and I think Laura explained that quite well. It's a lot in when you have it all listed out, it's going to read it through a screen reader. And it's a lot of text and not always easy to access. And I'll let Anne elaborate on that, though.
I'm sorry, are we talking about links?
Yep. So,
okay. So
clarification on active links versus non-active links.
Okay, so the issue for a screen reader user is that many times what they do is they do a keyboard shortcut that gives them links, just a list of links, so that they can peruse a document or peruse the website. And if it is the URL, then it will read what it says letter by letter, but it won't tell the screen reader user actually where that link goes. So for the Kansas State University example, that probably wasn't a good example because it's, you know, www.ksu.edu, but we've all encountered URLs that go on for half a mile, and you really don't get any information. If you only saw the URL, you really wouldn't understand where on earth it was taking you. So that is the reason why the descriptive link is so important to a screen reader user. Are there any other, Jason, are there any other questions?
I think we've caught up.
Okay, all right.
I believe so.
All right, so I am now going to mute myself, and Natalie will talk about video audio content.
Hello, everybody. And I am Natalie Bahari, and yes, I also work at the Student Access Center as one of the access advisors, and I work a lot with the deaf and hard of hearing students, along with some other students. But I wanted to talk about basically captioning. Just in general, captioning is a big thing now that we've gone to remote learning, because a lot of us, some people are doing things such as, having Zoom classes, and, other people are putting up documents that have embedded videos, and we need to be able to make sure that those things are accessible for everybody. So some of the things that I am going to talk about is there are different types of captioning. So I will go through that. I will also talk about, how to do closed captioning, as well as some tips if you are creating your own videos to make captioning easier. And I'll also talk about external videos and audios that people might be putting into their classes, and how to best work with those. Anne, if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so there are different types of captioning. The remote real-time captioning is the type of captioning that would be used if we are doing synchronous sessions, such as Zoom classes. So if you are having your class all get together at a particular time and you are talking over Zoom, live, then there may be a student in there that is deaf or hard of hearing that would need to have access to the audio, and a way to do this is through the remote real-time captioning. The remote real-time captioning basically does the captioning live as you're doing it. So it will allow the students to be able to participate. There is just a very short lag time, and but basically it is real time. It's just think in terms of, watching your news show on TV, and how that comes up. Or some of you may have been, at other conferences where you see the captioning going on just as people are speaking. So this is all, this is what's referred to as the remote real-time captioning. Recording sessions will be helpful because it does also record the captioning. So students that are deaf and hard of hearing, if they are trying to, read lips or read the captioning, it's going to be pretty much impossible to try to write notes. So in order to help with notes, if the captioning is captured along with the recording, then they will be able to go back and look at that recording and take their notes from the captioning. So that's very helpful. So again, we are definitely recommending that instructors record their sessions to help out students so that they can go back over those. Closed captioning is what we use when we have pre-recorded sessions. So, we have videos maybe that we recorded of our lecture, and now, we need to, now they need to be captioned. So there's different ways of doing this. And it's important to have everything closed captioned in order for not only the deaf and hard of hearing students to have access, but also to help out the students that are international students, say English is their second language, so now they have the subtitles to help them. And there's also, other students that they may learn differently, and being able to see the captions as well as listening to them is very helpful. And also, again, we're back in, you may have a lot of things going on in your household. For example, you've got, somebody that's maybe you're sitting there on the couch, somebody else is, listening to this, and so you want to be able to just read the captions so that you don't have to turn the sound on while you're listening to your Zoom session or your recording from one of your classes. So this allows for that as well. So there's a lot of good reasons to use the closed captioning. Obviously, if it is for a deaf or hard of hearing student, it is an accommodation, which would mean it's not just a nice thing to do, but it would be required to allow for access for those students. I also listed a reference for all different types of captioning. These aren't the only types of captioning, but it just helps you understand better what some of the different types of captioning are available. So, Anne, if we could maybe move on to the next one. How to close caption videos. Well, before we even talk about getting a video closed captioned, let's see if we can find a video that addresses the information that we need that is already closed captioned. That is the easiest thing to do. Sometimes we get used to using certain materials that we've used for a while, and sometimes and it's like, oh yeah, it's not closed captioned. I really should look into something else that that has the same information that maybe is already closed captioned. Or sometimes there are different versions of a video, and one of them is closed captioned and one of them is not. So there's that as well. So please just pay attention to the closed caption symbols. And as I went ahead and showed all the different symbols that might be shown to indicate closed captioning. Okay. If a video is short and you are comfortable with technology, you may want to go ahead and do the closed captioning yourself. I have and I've helped out instructors a little bit with this on some short videos and gone ahead and helped them get them closed captioned. And there's good information on YouTube on how to closed caption these videos. It's a pretty easy process through YouTube. The tedious part is always doing the transcription, which is why if it's a video that is very long at all, you may need to consider using a third-party vendor in order to do that. If a video is longer than, say, 15 minutes, then you probably don't want to do it yourself and use a third-party vendor. You can contact our office and we can help you get connected so that you can get connected with a third-party vendor. I work very closely with Brandon UTech, and he's very good with getting us connected with, we have a couple of companies. Automatic Sync is one that we are currently use quite a bit. During this particular time, we're able to more directly help instructors get their videos captioned through these third-party vendors. Certainly contact us, and if you have videos that need to be captioned, we will certainly help you with that. Either I or you can contact Brandon UTech. And he may even be able to help you with how to caption things as well, just as well as I can. Let me see if there are questions that I need to answer here on the chat. Hold on.
Natalie, I was going to point out too, and the university will cover, if it's required for an accommodation, the university will cover those captions. And it is good practice, certainly. And especially if you're using short videos, it's helpful. But it can be costly, and we're in a unique situation, obviously, where we moved a lot of people online, and we're helping to cover those costs to caption if it's due to an accommodation need. So, and but Natalie, so earlier there was a question: is Google Live Caption accessible or acceptable? I'm sorry. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the audio captions on YouTube as compared to editing those and the importance of doing so?
Okay. The thing with using anything that is using automatic captioning is they're not going to be all that accurate. So that would include, that's going to include your Google Chat. I actually believe I'm not that familiar with it, and I haven't been able to access it with my particular Zoom account, but Zoom actually says that they have an automatic captioning feature as well for their meetings, but again, there's always concerns about accuracy when it is using a technology that is basically a speech-to-text technology without any kind of editing that goes with it. So
I would also point out that we're going to assess students' knowledge of this information, and if there's a chance for them to miss that information because it's the wrong text to what's being spoken, that's going to get the student off on that information, and that is not copacetic. We've got to make sure it's accurate because we expect them to know the information for your course.
Yes, you are definitely right on that, Jason. So, for example, this may be a class where, you have some technical jargon in it, and we've all experienced this with our phones, for example. It will just convert it to the word that it thinks that you're saying, and not necessarily the word that you actually wanted. So so there are going to be inaccuracies whenever they are using that kind of speech-to-text technology. So that doesn't include any kind of editor to go with it. So if you are going to create your own video, one of the things that I would strongly suggest is that you work from a transcript. Working from a transcript is very helpful. Just it will keep you from doing, it will keep you on track so that there are fewer mistakes when you do closed captioning. There's not going to be, and I'm doing it right now, lots of ums and things like that, that show up in the captioning that can get in the way of the meaning of what you're trying to say. So creating a transcript is really helpful that way. And not only that, if you already have a transcript, then there's no transcription that needs to be, it's the same words. You can actually use that transcript to upload and use as the closed captions. And you may just need to go in and do a little bit of adjusting for the timing of it, but which is not as much of an editing task as trying to do an entire transcription. You want to keep in, especially during this time, you want to make sure that you're keeping everything concise. Don't need to get the information out there, get to it. Don't want to have a whole lot of extraneous information in there that is not needed. That way your captioning will come out a lot better, and it's nicer for everybody. So are there any And I'll address more questions if there's questions on that later. Can we go ahead and go? Again, on external videos, if you are using things like YouTube clips, you know, that's all fine and good. They may or may not be captioned. If they're not captioned, they need to be captioned if you want your students to watch them, and you got to make sure they have access to that, as well as to anything that maybe you may create it on your own. Just because you add it doesn't necessarily mean the other person has closed captioned it, you know, and made sure that it's accurate. So if they're using the automatic captioning, again, you're going to want to check for accuracy. That's really important. And again, look for videos that are already captioned, as opposed to trying to come up with transcripts on your own. And you are using videos that aren't captioned. And hopefully that answers most of your questions. I'm open for questions now, so that's pretty much all I have to say.
I did capture a couple questions from earlier. The couple questions in regards to accessibility checker compared to UDoIT. Before I get to that though, I want to highlight a website called WebAIM. It's WebAIM, webaim.org. And I'm going to type that into the chat here. WebAIM is a very handy site, used as a reference all the time to look up information on how to make content accessible. It's one of the primary aims is education, although it's larger than just that, but that's one of the areas that it can help with many different formats. Early on, they really helped us with PowerPoint accessibility, Word, Excel, and pieces like that. That's some of the earliest things I myself started 20 years ago presenting on PowerPoint accessibility because it was a challenge. And it's brought up in regards to accessibility for PowerPoint, type in accessibility in search. Because you haven't figured out how to use it to the ribbon toolbar. I didn't capture who said this, and I missed it, I think. I just copied the text. And it is challenging to add that to the toolbar. I find the Microsoft toolbar changes depending on which version you're in. But the accessibility, PowerPoint accessibility tool is helpful, but keep in mind that it has trouble checking contrast and some elements that are visually assessed that the computer doesn't do as well in. And it will check for extra text boxes and point those out as well. And then in regards to accessibility checker on Canvas, it's very helpful. And UDoIT can be a bit complicated. The feedback you get, Zaya, I think is who mentioned this one, if I remember right. And yeah, UDoIT, they have a lot of, very more tech savvy language that they use. The accessibility checker seems to be more user friendly. I will agree with that. I'll see if Ann has any comments. Yeah, Ann.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Laura may be able to give a more complete answer to the UDoIT. I think UDoIT checks on Canvas accessibility, which Canvas platform does really well.
Mm-hmm.
It does not check things that professors post to Canvas.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I can go ahead and jump in. So UDoIT was created several years ago before Canvas had an accessibility checker. So it was kind of the original accessibility checker that was implemented with Canvas. And they really do kind of check the same things. And it is only the things that are native in the Canvas environment. It is not checking any PowerPoints, PDF, Word documents, websites that you may upload within Canvas. So just be aware of that when you're checking that over.
Yeah, certainly. I think I missed one. Oh, podcasts. Oh, yeah, podcasts are becoming popular again. Early on, Apple with iTunes U was the big thing, and a lot of universities were using that quite a bit. And there was a way at the time to make sure you had a transcript that was linkable to that podcast. And same with podcasts. You can have a feed that comes from the podcast with transcripts. It depends on what you're using as a client to manage the podcasts. So you'd want to check with that, but definitely you'd want to make sure that folks knew how to access the transcript. If you had a link to a podcast, if you have a podcast or audio in a Canvas course or in a class, you want to make sure to have links to the transcript available if it's for an accommodation. If you haven't had a request for an accommodation, it's not like you have to do it, but we definitely suggest it as good practice. And going back again to what Natalie said about having that transcript ahead of time before you read the text can help you read more fluently and then work to help that person have access, and especially for those who need searchable text to help them study. Oh, and I just saw the PowerPoint, descriptive text, right-clicking will give you the descriptive text. The accessibility checker in PowerPoint will check for descriptive text and alt text for pictures as well and notify you of that. Okay, I mentioned funding. Will the feds provide more funding to help with accessibility software? Not necessarily. Not a lot of money out there. We have some funding to help with what's needed for an accommodation through our office. It would be nice if there's a lot more money to support, a lot of these accommodations throughout everything. I think if you use, let's say, video sparingly throughout a course, it's great to make it fully accessible because it could really help all of your users. And to be honest, at any point, you could have a user take your class who's deaf, hard of hearing, and we need those captions right away. And it gives us much more ability to respond to those students. We have to respond in a reasonable time frame. But as far as funding, there's not necessarily a change in that funding available to make things accessible at large. In fact, it's good. We're in an interesting climate right now with COVID-19, certainly.
And I just want to mention, because I hadn't made this clear, when I'm working with students that are deaf or hard of hearing, as soon as I am able to find out that they are enrolled in particular classes, I do my best to inform instructors that they will have a student in their class that uses closed captioning and or remote real-time captioning, so that there is as much time as possible to prepare materials for classes that might need to be closed captioned, or to arrange for a remote real-time captionist to be there for the classes.
Yep. Indeed.
So I'm going to jump in for just a second and try and talk about that a little bit too in the online environment. It is a tricky position that we are put in, because it is best practice to build your course with accessibility in mind. So making sure that your PowerPoints and your PDFs are fully accessible before you upload them, those kinds of things. And so what you can do to get things captioned ahead of time, like Natalie mentioned using YouTube, those kinds of things is certainly helpful. Creating that transcript and uploading the transcript as a way to have that interim step, because it can help all of your students. But one thing to keep in mind as well is that if it's a situation that's only being used once in that one semester, that one class, and you do not have a student in that semester that has specifically worked with the Access Center for that accommodation, it is not required that it be captioned. So that's kind of a tricky line. But if you say you're doing a quick 1-minute video just to say, hey class, there seemed to be some confusion about this assignment. I wanted to make sure you all knew that, so on and so forth. You don't need to focus and delay getting that video uploaded because you're worried about captioning. Go ahead and get it uploaded. Now, if you have a situation that you do have a student that has the accommodation with the Student Access Center, then, and it's a Global Campus, a course run through Global Campus, then Global Campus can help with implementing that captioning process.
It's, and I will say it is an interesting environment that we're in regards to captioning, because it is a piece that unfortunately does take a lot of time and funding as compared to some of the other steps frankly, if you can build the steps towards writing an accessible Word document, that'll improve your use of Word incredibly so, especially if you're about to write a large paper. The styles, it's all, it's in the ETDR for dissertations and research papers. It's all pieces that are very common. Video and captions is a little bit different. It's a lot more of a process. And as Natalie stated, those automatic technologies aren't there yet. I've been waiting for that since Dragon version 3, I think it was, in 2000. And 2, no, we were on 7 by then, I think. I don't know. Thinking that it was going to, save us all in the future. And it still hasn't. It makes a lot of mistakes and a lot of costly mistakes that aren't acceptable for the ADA. And so that's a challenge. And it takes a lot of time to caption well. But there are new steps and pieces we can take to do that quickly. And as Laura mentioned, if you're going to use the content over and over again, think about captioning it. It can pay it forward really nicely and make it much more accessible, not only your students with disabilities, but many other students as well. I think often about our students from other countries speaking English as a second language. Captions work really well for helping with information and helps us be a more diverse and accepting institution when we have that, and are more accommodating. But it can take a lot more steps, but we don't want you to hesitate from putting a video together quickly, getting information out to students, especially in this remote world we're living in right now. We want you to respond to your students quickly and help them out and clearly and concisely as possible.
And I feel like we've been bad-mouthing these automatic captionings. Actually, they work very well as a jumping point for a transcript as well. So if you do need to close caption something, sometimes it's a lot easier just to go ahead and use the automatic caption function for, in YouTube, for example, and just go back and just edit if there are any errors.
Yeah. It's come a long way.
Doing going through and transcribe, writing a complete transcript.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. As I always say, in 2 years, it's going to get much better. But I've been saying that 7, 10 times now. It's been many years, but it's going to get there. It's going to get there.
Well, it looks like we are out of time. Thank you all so much for being here to talk us through this process. And I know you are available for questions. So everyone here, if you have further questions, please reach out to this team, reach out to Trina or I, and we are happy to answer your questions further. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, it's good to see you all. Take care and good luck, and let us know if you have any questions.